Among the forgotten court documents of Natchez, Mississippi, there exists a marriage certificate dated March 1851 that has puzzled historians for over a century. The bride was listed as property 6 months before the wedding. The groom owned 37 human beings. What happened between those 6 months defies every social law of the antebellum South. Yet the evidence suggests it actually occurred. Local archives reveal that within a single year, this woman went from sleeping in slave quarters to signing her name in the master's bedroom. And the path she took involved every unmarried man on that property. The community that witnessed this transformation kept silent for decades. But the truth was preserved in letters, diaries, and testimony that paint a picture so calculated, so methodical, that modern readers struggle to believe one person could orchestrate such manipulation. Before we continue with the story of Rose Chanau and the Bellpoint Plantation, if stories of calculated survival and dangerous ambition intrigue you, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss our next investigation into America's darkest chapters. And tell us in the comments, what state are you listening from? We love knowing where our audience connects with these forgotten tales. Because tonight's story, her story, is not one of romance, nor scandal, nor simple seduction. It is a story carved out of desperation, sharpened by fear, and driven by a woman who realized early that beauty was the only weapon she possessed in a world built to destroy her. In the 6 months between being counted as livestock and signing a marriage certificate, Rose Chanau rewrote her destiny in a way that defied every rule the South lived by. Some called her wicked, others whispered she was blessed, but all agreed on one thing: Rose understood power in a way no one else on that plantation ever did. And what she did with that power is what makes this story unforgettable. Rose Chanau was born on a fog-soaked morning in the spring of 1834. On the far edge of the Bellpoint Plantation estate, where the fields seemed endless, and childhood was a luxury no one expected to last. For most children born into bondage, the world introduced itself with labor, hunger, and fear. But for Rose, the world introduced itself with something else: attention. From the moment she could walk, people looked at her differently. Other children on the plantation blended into the background, but Rose, she stood out. Older women whispered at first. "Pretty little thing," they muttered during wash days, as if beauty were a curse that came bundled with a warning. And in many ways, it was. Her mother tried to keep her close, shielding her from wandering eyes. But she couldn't shield her forever. Men on the plantation field hands, overseers. Even visitors who passed through Bellpoint would pause when she walked by. Their eyes lingered just a second too long. Rose was too young to understand why. But she understood one thing: people changed when they looked at her. It started small. When she was 7, she was caught taking a handful of berries from the forbidden garden behind the smokehouse. Any other child would have been whipped, but the overseer just stared down at her, confused, almost embarrassed, and simply said, "Don't let me catch you again." She didn't know it then, but that moment was her first lesson. At 9 years old, another moment came. She tripped carrying water and spilled the bucket in front of an older farmhand. He could have beaten her for losing time. Instead, he sighed, filled it for her, and carried it halfway back. She watched his face as he walked beside her, stiff, uncomfortable, pretending not to care, but she saw the truth. She could see it in his eyes, and that was the first time Rose realized something unsettling. She had an effect on people. It frightened her at first. Power, when you don't understand it, feels like danger. But as she grew older, she also began to understand that attention, especially the kind she received, could be used. Attention meant protection. Attention meant options, however limited. Attention meant bending the rules, even if only slightly. By the age of 11, she started to see patterns. She noticed how the overseer's tone softened around her, how certain boys competed to carry water buckets when she needed help, how men twice her age straightened their backs when she walked by, pretending not to stare but always staring anyway. And the older she got, the more pronounced it became. She didn't choose this world, but she learned its rules faster than anyone else. She learned that beauty wasn't just something you possessed. It was something that possessed you. It dictated how others treated her. It dictated who she was allowed to be. On Bellpoint Plantation, Beauty wasn't a blessing, it was a label, a danger, a spotlight she never asked for, but could never escape. But it was also the only thing she had that others did in single quotes t. No money, no freedom, no future. Just a face that made people hesitate, even if only for a heartbeat. And in a place where hesitation could mean mercy, and mercy could mean survival, that hesitation mattered. Rose noticed every detail, every slip in a man's voice, every nervous swallow, every stolen glance. She collected those moments the way other girls collected memories, quietly, carefully, as if she were assembling the pieces of a map she would use one day, a map no one else knew she was drawing. Because long before Rose Chanau became the woman people whispered about, long before her name appeared beside the name of the master himself, she was just a girl learning a hard truth. If the world was going to take everything from her, she had only one weapon left: the way the world looked at her. By the time Rose was 14, the attention she once found confusing had taken on a darker, heavier shape. Childhood softness was gone. People no longer saw her as a girl, they saw her as something else, something they wanted, something they believed they could take. The first man to cross that line was Jonas Weaver, a hardened field hand in his mid-30s. Jonas worked the cotton rows closest to the woods, a man known for his strength and for the quiet rage he carried in his jaw. He didn't talk much, didn't laugh, didn't soften for anyone, except Rose. It started with glances. At first, she told herself she imagined them, but then the glances became stares, long, invasive, searching stares that clung to her even when she turned away. Sometimes she'd feel his eyes on her before she even saw him. She hated how her stomach tightened every time his shadow appeared over the ridge, and Jonas seemed to appear everywhere. At the well, by the smokehouse, near the laundry yard where she worked, he became a ghost at the edge of her every task. One afternoon, she dropped an armful of linens while crossing the yard. The wind snatched them, scattering them across the dirt. She bent to gather them when suddenly Jonas was beside her, kneeling, silent, his calloused hands brushing the sheets. He didn't say a word. He just stared. That stare frightened her, not because it was violent, but because it was in single quotes t. It was longing. And longing, she already understood, could be dangerous. A few days later, Jonas cornered her by the barn. He offered her a small pouch of dried peaches, an impossible luxury for someone like her. She wanted to run, but hunger was always louder than pride. She reached out slowly, hesitantly. When their hands brushed, he inhaled sharply, as if her touch had startled him. That was when she knew. He wanted her, badly. And wanting in men like Jonas came at a price. She hated him, feared him, but she also noticed every time he wanted her, she got away with things nobody else could. It happened again and again. If she was late to work, the overseer almost punished her until Jonas stepped in, pretending she was helping him. If she spilled something, Jonas took the blame. When another girl snapped at Rose in jealousy, Jonas intervened with a cold, warning glare that silenced the entire yard. Rose despised being under his gaze, yet she couldn't ignore the truth. His obsession gave her a small, fragile layer of safety. So she began to test it carefully. Quietly. One morning, she asked another girl to swap work duties with her. A dangerous request. But Jonas made the switch happen with just one look. Rose pretended not to notice, pretended it was coincidence, but the power was unmistakable. Days later, she walked slightly slower past him, just to see if he'd react. He did. He always did. A twitch in his jaw, a shift in his stance, a subtle step closer. She didn't desire him, not even a little, but she learned from him. Learned how a man rearranges his world when he decides a woman belongs to him. Learned how far desire could bend rules. How fear and favor sometimes wore the same face. But she also learned something far more dangerous. If one man wanted her this much, one man could protect her this much, Jonas was not the future she wanted. He was simply her first lesson, her first test, her first glimpse of the leverage she could hold. And though she feared him deeply, she began to understand something even more terrifying. If she could influence Jonas, what could she do with men who held real power? What could she do with men who mattered? Jonas wasn't the beginning of her story. He was the spark that ignited the strategy she didn't yet know she was building. Life on Bellpoint Plantation ran on more than cotton and cruelty. Beneath the overseers, beneath the work schedules, beneath the punishments and the chains, there existed another system, quiet, invisible, yet powerful. A secret economy built not on money, but on favors, protection, and whatever scraps a person could barter for one more day of safety. Everyone traded something. Some traded strength, some traded secrets, some traded silence, and some, like Rose, traded attention, even when they didn't mean to. By the time she was 16, Rose had learned the unspoken rules of Bellpoint better than most adults. She could read tensions the way others read weather. She knew which overseer was cruelest before noon. She knew when a field hand was too hungry to focus. She knew when jealousy smoldered beneath polite words. On plantations, jealousy was often more dangerous than hunger. Women resented her, some quietly, some openly. They didn't need to know what she did or didn't do. Her beauty alone was enough to place her outside the circle. Outside meant unsafe, and unsafe meant vulnerable. They didn't know her life, but they knew her power, and that was enough to make them hate her. The other enslaved women had watched men soften around Rose, even men who were hardened by violence. They watched how Jonas hovered nearby like a guard dog, how overseers paused before scolding her, how she was punished less than others for the same mistakes. To them, it looked like privilege. To Rose, it felt like walking a tightrope. In whispered corners of the quarters, her name became a currency of its own, passed from mouth to mouth, heavy with suspicion, envy, and fear. She thinks she better than us. She using them men. Just wait. Somebody gone put her back in her place. Rose heard it. She heard all of it. Every hissed comment, every side eye, every forced smile from women who did not trust her. She didn't blame them. She didn't even argue it. Because in truth, she was using the men who watched her. Though half the time, she didn't fully understand the power she held. In Bellpoint's shadow economy, men held the formal power whips, commands, punishments, but they held something else to. Desire. And desire was the strongest currency of all. Most days, Rose didn't have enough food to fill her stomach, but the men who wanted her left small offerings whenever they could get away with it. A stolen biscuit, a piece of cloth, a handful of tobacco to trade, a wooden comb someone carved by hand. Sometimes, protection was offered without a word. Jonas would step into arguments before she had the chance to open her mouth. Another field hand, a younger man named Caleb, began doing her chores whenever the overseer wasn't looking. A stable boy brought her warm water in winter, a luxury for anyone not in the master's house. None of these men discussed their efforts. They didn't coordinate. They weren't competing yet. They were simply trying to earn her favor. In hopes of earning something more, Rose never promised anyone anything. She never flirted, never asked, but she saw what their want created. With Jonas, she learned fear could protect her. With Caleb, she learned admiration could shield her. With the stable boy, she learned kindness could be bought with a smile. Piece by piece, she built a fragile web of influence, unintentionally at first, then more deliberately. Not because she was manipulative, but because she wanted to survive. The overseers had whips. The master had control of life and death. Rose had nothing, except the effect she had on others. And on Bellpoint Plantation, that was enough to make her powerful, and enough to make her a target. Because in a world where everyone was starving for safety, anyone who had even a drop more than the rest was both envied and despised. By 17, Rose understood something that few people on Bellpoint ever realized. Survival was a strategy, not a prayer, not a hope, not a lucky break. Strategy. Every glance, every word, every small concession could be leveraged. Every interaction could be converted into protection, information, or advantage. She began to weave a web, carefully, methodically, calculated, not for pleasure, not for love, not even for attention, but for leverage. Each man on the plantation had his weaknesses, his desires, his ambitions. Rose observed. She listened. She remembered. And she acted. Jonas, the older field hand who had first noticed her, became a source of information. Through him, she learned which overseers tolerated mistakes, which scolded unnecessarily, which were looking for small infractions to punish. Caleb, eager to please, could be guided. The stable boy, quiet but observant, became a courier for small messages, whispered warnings, or exchanged favors. Even the overseer, who at first had seemed invincible, could be influenced. With just a word, a carefully timed gesture, a subtle smile, she could draw his attention, hold it, bend it toward her advantage. They didn't understand. They couldn't. She didn't seduce. She survived. And men mistook the two for the same thing. Rose's reputation grew silently. In whispered corners of the quarters, the cooks and washerwomen watched how the men moved around her. In the fields, gossip traveled on the wind like smoke. The girl who commanded attention without ever asking for it. The girl who held power invisible to the master, yet tangible to anyone who observed closely enough. It wasn't cruelty. It wasn't trickery. It was necessary. Each connection she maintained was a thread in a protective net. Each man who competed for her attention became a line of defense. If one tried to harm her, another would intervene. If one became suspicious, another could provide cover. The web wasn't flawless. There were risks. Moments when her calculation faltered, when jealousy flared to high, when someone questioned her motives too loudly. But Rose learned quickly, adapt, adjust, redirect, anticipate. Her world, once defined by chains and strict boundaries, now offered openings she could exploit. Each interaction with a man was a chess move. Every whispered secret, a pawn in a larger game. Over time, her safety became legendary, though the reasoning was misunderstood. Some men saw her as cunning. Others called her witch-like. Women whispered warnings to their daughters. But none could stop her. None could truly touch her, not without risking the wrath of the others, each connected to her, each unwittingly playing her game. And in that darkness, she flourished. Rose did not smile at her victories. She did not revel in the fear or fascination she inspired. She only counted the cost of each maneuver, the value of each ally, and the protection it bought her for the next day, the next hour, the next encounter. In a world that had assigned her the lowest value possible, she had learned to assign her self-worth, not with gold, not with titles, not with status, but with influence, with power, with knowledge that no whip, no chain, no decree could touch her without first passing through her web. And in a place where death and punishment lurked behind every misstep, that web became the difference between living and being forgotten. By the time she reached her 18th birthday, Rose was no longer simply surviving Bellpoint Plantation. She was navigating it, mastering it, bending its hidden currents to her own advantage. Invisible but untouchable. Every man who thought he controlled her had already become a part of her plan. Every glance, every desire, every whispered confession fed her strategy. In that world, power was never given. It was taken. And Rose Chanau had just begun to take hers, asterisk asterisk. By the time Rose's web had begun to spread across Bellpoint, the consequences of her strategy started to reveal themselves. Men who once glanced at her with casual interest now found themselves consumed by obsession. Competition flared in the fields and quarters, subtle at first, a shove, a glare, a whispered insult, but soon escalated into outright confrontation. Fights broke out. Knives were drawn in the stables. Words became weapons. Secrets were stolen, spread, and twisted into new threats. For the first time, Rose felt the danger of the influence she had cultivated. What had once been a shield now risked becoming a spark for violence she could not fully control. Some men grew dangerously attached. Jonas, the field hand who had first been drawn to her, began to follow her too closely, questioning her movements, lingering where he shouldn't. Caleb's attentions became erratic, unpredictable, fueled by a jealousy that clouded his judgment. Even the overseer, normally disciplined and calculating, started to act on whims. Lured into disputes he should have ignored. And yet, Rose did not panic. She understood that survival was never about emotion, it was about leverage, positioning, and foresight. She observed the chaos carefully, noting who could be calmed, who could be redirected, and who posed the greatest threat. But she knew instinctively that this game had a limit. Influence over men could only carry her so far. The jealousies were rising, the violence mounting, and for the first time, She realized that protection at this level was temporary. Her web could shield her from small storms, but not from the wrath of those who were truly untouchable. The owner of Bellpoint Plantation himself. Her mind turned toward him. The man who held absolute power, whose word could undo her in a single instant. Gaining favor with him would not be about flirtation or charm, it would be about positioning, about proving herself untouchable in a way no other man could dispute. She was smart enough to know something no one else did. The only real safety comes from being untouchable. Every thread she had woven now became a stepping stone toward him. Every man who had sought to control her, to harm her, or to manipulate her, became a tool to be used, redirected, or neutralized. She began to move through the plantation differently, less visible, more deliberate, calculating every encounter, every whispered word, every glance. The quarters that had once seemed safe now felt like a trap if she lingered too long. The fields offered opportunity, but also risk. Her survival depended on the balance between visibility and invisibility, attention and avoidance, influence and restraint. And while some women on the plantation whispered and plotted behind her back, Rose no longer feared their resentment. She understood it as a natural byproduct of power, the envy of those who had less. She did not try to appease them. She did not try to make herself likable. She only ensured she remained untouchable. In the evenings, when the sun sank low and shadows stretched across Bellpoint, she traced the patterns she had created. The jealousies, the fights, the alliances, all were pieces on a board. She moved with precision, anticipating the next surge of anger, the next spark of desire, the next whisper of betrayal. By the end of that year, the plantation knew her not just as a girl, not just as a beauty, but as something else entirely, a force of nature. Men feared her, women watched her, and she prepared for the moment when she would step beyond them all, into the only place where true safety existed, the master's quarters, under his gaze. Untouchable and unrivaled, the web had worked, and now it was time to climb. By the time the jealousies reached their peak, the owner of Bellpoint had begun to notice, not at first with intent, but through observation. From the veranda of his grand house, he watched the shifting tides of attention around Rose Chanau. Fights in the fields, whispered threats in the quarters, stolen glances in the stables. Chaos seemed to follow her like a shadow, and yet she moved through it unscathed. It was curiosity at first. He noticed the way men fought over her, how women whispered about her. He noticed her calm when storms erupted, her patience when tempers flared, and most of all, her silence. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She simply existed in the eye of the storm, untouchable and unyielding. Slowly, curiosity shifted into fascination. He began to pay attention to her movements, her habits, the way she carried herself. It was subtle at first, an extended glance, a quiet assessment, but Rose sensed the change immediately. The air around the house carried a different weight, and she understood that the ultimate prize, the one place no other man could reach, was within sight. She adjusted her behavior deliberately. Her sharp, casual defiance softened. She moved slower, quieter, her eyes calculating but unassuming. Every gesture became a measure of control, a signal that she understood the game at a level none of the others could fathom. She lingered near the house, walking past the garden where the owner often stood, letting the wind carry her scent, her presence, without seeming to notice. Rumors began to ripple across the plantation. Some whispered that she had caught the master's eye. Others said he was intrigued, perhaps even fond of her. These whispers reached the ears of men who had once sought to control her, igniting fresh waves of jealousy. But Rose didn't react. She let the currents flow, letting fear, fascination, and desire all work on her behalf. He didn't fall in love with her. He fell in love with the idea that he discovered her, and in this understanding, she found the key to her next move. The owner wasn't drawn to her beauty alone, nor to her charm. He was captivated by the sense that she existed just beyond reach, that she could be known, understood, and yet never fully possessed. This was power beyond the jealousy of any man in the fields or the quarters. This was influence that could grant her a shield no one else could challenge. She learned to walk near him without speaking, to stand just long enough to be seen, and to retreat before interest turned into desire. Every encounter, every glance, Every subtle nod became a calculated maneuver in a game whose stakes were life and survival. The plantation buzzed with tension. Men tried to regain control, women whispered more urgently, and Rose moved with deliberate grace through it all. She had reached a new stage of the game. She was no longer simply a girl surviving in the quarters. She was now a player in the center of Bellpoint's power. As night fell over the house and the fields quieted, she lingered at the edge of the veranda's shadow, watching the owner study her from above. In that moment, she understood the truth of her position. Influence, carefully wielded, was stronger than fear, and the master's fascination so delicate, so fragile would become the ultimate weapon in the game she had learned to play so well. The real challenge had begun, and Rose was ready. Tension had been building for months, threading through every corner of Bellpoint Plantation like a silent storm. Men fought in the shadows of the barns. Jealousy boiled over into shouts and threats. Women whispered warnings that no one heeded. Rose Chanau moved carefully through it all, aware that one misstep could destroy the fragile control she had built. Then the moment came. A fight erupted in the fields, loud, violent, and reckless. A man who had once been cautious overstepped, his anger unleashed in a torrent of accusation and blows. Others tried to intervene, but it was chaos, raw and dangerous. Rose watched, calculating. She knew that if she stayed among them, she would become collateral. Every glance at her could ignite another spark of jealousy, and this time, she might not escape unscathed. She made her choice quickly. The only path to safety and to control was the owner, not as a plea for affection, but as a calculated move. As she approached the grand house, the weight of the plantation's whispers pressed against her, but she carried herself with the calm assurance that had become her armor. The owner noticed immediately. He saw the tension in her posture, the fire in her eyes, the subtle calculation in her every movement, and in that moment, he made a decision, one that would change everything. He called the men back, his voice commanding and unyielding. They obeyed, wary now not only of their master but of Rose herself. From that night forward, her status shifted. The men who had once fought over her now kept a cautious distance. The women who had whispered behind her back paused, uncertain how to approach the new reality. And Rose understood the truth of her situation. Power, once acknowledged by the master, was absolute. In one night, she went from a woman men whispered about to a woman none of them dared to touch. It was a transformation that went beyond desire or fear. It was recognition of authority, the unspoken acknowledgement that she had navigated the treacherous currents of Bellpoint better than anyone else. From the quarters to the house, from whispers to silence, the balance had shifted. She had achieved a status that no man could claim and no woman could challenge. And yet, Rose knew this was only the beginning. The owner's attention was a tool, a shield, but it was also a responsibility. Every move now mattered more than ever. The plantation had changed overnight, but the game, the one she had learned as a girl, was far from over. She was no longer merely surviving. She was orchestrating, and every eye, every thought, every whisper now moved according to her design. That night, in the quiet after the storm, Rose Chanau understood the full measure of her influence and the dangerous ambition it required. The plantation had never seen anything like it. Whispers had traveled faster than the river through Natchez, from the slave quarters to the main house, and then the words finally reached every ear. The owner had proposed to Rose Chanau. Shock rippled through Bellpoint Plantation. Men who had once coveted her now avoided her gaze. Women who had envied her stopped in their tracks, unsure whether to scowl or curtsy. The audacity of it, a woman who had once been nothing more than a girl in the quarters, now to be the master's wife, defied every expectation of the antebellum South. Rose herself remained quiet, measured. She did not allow a flicker of triumph to escape her face. Those who assumed she had won saw only the surface. What they could not understand was that marriage did not mean safety, it meant a new battlefield. Privilege came immediately. She could walk freely through the halls, dine in the owner's presence, and command attention in ways that had once been impossible. She had a voice that carried now, a subtle authority that men obeyed without question. Yet, with every step she took in this new world, resentment followed closely behind. The men she had once managed were now restless, jealous, or bitter. The women, resentful and wary, observed her every gesture, waiting for a misstep. And Rose understood the precariousness of it all. Every glance, every whisper, every compliment was a thread she had to balance carefully. The power she had fought to claim was fragile, dependent on perception as much as on position. A single wrong move, and everything she had built could collapse. She learned quickly to navigate the spaces between obedience and envy, desire and suspicion. She smiled when she needed to, quieted her voice when she needed to, and observed constantly. Remembering the lessons of her past, every interaction was a calculation, a measure of survival and influence. She didn't marry for love. She married for peace, the first peace she ever tasted. It was a peace bought at a high price, cunning, patience, and ruthless understanding of human desire. And though the plantation might have seen her as triumphant, Rose knew the truth. Peace was not comfort, it was leverage. It was control. And in a world designed to strip women like her of agency, she had found the rarest currency of all. The marriage marked the pinnacle of her careful orchestration, but it was also a reminder. Power was never static. Envy, violence, and ambition would never stop, they only shifted targets. And Rose Chanau, now in the master's house, understood better than anyone that the knife's edge she had walked for years had only grown sharper. Yet, for the first time in her life, she held the blade, and she held it with purpose. Rose Chanau's life left ripples long after the doors of Bellpoint Plantation closed behind her. What she built, the webs, the influence, the survival, has been preserved in whispers, letters, and court documents. Historians debate her story, some calling her manipulative, calculating, and ruthless. Others see a woman who navigated an impossible world with intelligence, courage, and strategic foresight. It is easy to judge her from a distance, to label her actions as ambition or cruelty. But to understand Rose is to remember the world she was born into, a world designed to deny her choice, her safety, and her voice. Every step she took was a negotiation, a survival tactic, a test of human desire and fear. She was never merely a participant in her story, she was its architect. She studied the rules that bound her, and then she bent them to her will. Some would call that immoral, some would call it genius, and perhaps both are true. The plantation remembers her differently than the historical texts. To some, she is a shadow of scandal, a cautionary tale whispered in the corridors of the old house. To others, she is the rare example of a woman who claimed agency in a world built to strip it away. And so, we leave it to you, the listener. How should we remember Rose Chanau? As a manipulator who played human desire for personal gain, or as a survivor who understood the rules and found a way to live on her own terms? History rarely offers simple answers. Human behavior rarely does. Rose's story sits in that gray area where morality and survival collide. A space both fascinating and uncomfortable. It challenges our assumptions about power, gender, and ambition. Some call her manipulative. Some call her brilliant. I call her human, and maybe that is the most important lesson of all, that even in the darkest corners of history, the human spirit finds a way to navigate, endure, and sometimes to outsmart the world itself.